Welcome to Changemakers Live. For millions of children across Canada, September is back to school season. But for children affected by crises like natural disasters and conflict, school may seem like a distant dream. Today, we're going to be talking about education during crises. How do we ensure children stay in school even in the most dire of circumstances? Changemakers Live is a monthly live stream where we demystify a social issue with the help of an expert from World Vision Canada. And my co host Lexi is going to be introducing our expert today.
Thanks, KL. Well, we couldn't have picked a better person to have today's conversation with. Our colleague today is Nancy Delcall. She's our education technical specialist and global education coordinator. And in that role, Nancy supports education technical programming and education grants, both in situations of humanitarian emergencies, but also in terms of long term development. Now, Nancy has been with World Vision Canada for almost 15 years. That's more than you and me combined, KL. And what's even more fascinating is before joining World Vision Canada, Nancy actually was a classroom teacher and teacher trainer. So amazing. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm so excited to be able to share with our audience today.
So, we're just going to jump right into it. Right off the bat, how do emergencies impact children's education?
Well, there are many kinds of emergencies. They can be conflict, they can be natural disaster, but in all cases, children's learning is disrupted. They are um, they are moved from place to place. They are not in their normal school setting, and for the youngest learners, in particular, loss of learning if they stay out of school too long. We also see a lot of mental health issues in children who are out of school. We feel a lack of stability, hopelessness about their future, and we try to restore that to them. But more than anything, the biggest problem is dropouts. Often children will drop out of school and they never come back.
And I guess to expand on that, is there a gender angle to the issue? Like, how are girls more affected than boys, if they
Right.
are?
Boys and girls are both deeply by it in different ways. For girls, we see the biggest problem being early marriage, early pregnancy. World Vision actually did a report that estimated about 1 million girls in sub-Saharan Africa would not return to school after COVID due to pregnancy alone. And the countries that I've been talking to or visiting are saying that they're seeing real spikes in teen pregnancies amongst girls. For boys, they'll often drop out of school to make money for the family, and they don't see necessarily a reason to go back to school, so they'll stay in labor, or they might even join a militia. They could be recruited into militia. Both boys and girls could be recruited into militia. So there are different threats to both girls and
Yeah, it's eye-opening to hear that these education issues, especially during emergencies, affect girls and boys differently, but they all miss out and lose out. Now, do we know, Nancy, how big the problem is? How many children are out of school because of emergencies, and which countries are the most affected?
right. So there is an entity at the UN. They've done a report called Education Under Attack, and they estimate about 222 million children worldwide are affected by crisis right now. So that can mean that they're out of school. About 74 million of those children are out of school completely. About 120 are in school, 120 million are in school, but not achieving proficiency in math and reading. And another 20 million may be in school, may be achieving proficiency in mathematics and reading, but they still need other kinds of support, like mental health support or child protection. So all told, that is a huge increase since the last time they did this estimate, which was in 2016. And they estimated about 75 million children were affected at that point. So you can see the huge increase. due to conflicts worldwide and due to COVID as well.
Those are some really dire numbers.
One number I should also add is that it's more predominantly females, girl students who are affected, but 84% of those children are in protracted crises. That means those crises have no end in sight,
Oh shoot.
right? So they could have moved from their country and they never go back, like some of the Syrians left Syria. So these are protracted crises that have huge impacts on the future of these children.
So we know the numbers. You've given us a really good picture of the numbers behind the situation. Why is it so important to restore education for children in times of crises? How is it possible for children to keep learning in the midst of crises when things like, I don't know, refugees in Ukraine or internally displaced people in Ukraine literally hear the sound of gunfire going off around them?
So there's two questions there. Why is it important? Education is not normal first response in an emergency. We're looking for shelter, we're looking for food, we're looking for clean water. But it is the one thing that establishes normalcy in a child, brings them back to a routine that they're familiar with. They're with their peers, they're with caring adults who are looking after them, protecting them from abuse, keeping them in safe spaces where they can learn. So education gives them stability. It's life sustaining. And it gives them hope for the future as well. So it's very important to try and restore that as quickly as we can, even though education is the least funded sector in an emergency response. So that's why it's so important to get things started again. Your second question was about how do you keep it going? Well, if you're in a situation where there's bombs dropping around you, you're probably on the run. You're moving, right? You're moving from one district, one region, one country to another. So we wait until they're in a more stable situation, like a refugee camp or an IDP camp, where we can establish safe alternative learning spaces for children and make sure that they're protected, they're back to that routine. They have play time during their day so that the activities are play based to just make them feel better about being where they are, and that more than anything that they are supported.
So education is important not just for children's cognitive development, but also their mental health, their feelings of stability and hope. Now, Nancy, in your work, I'm sure you've seen a lot of places and met a lot of people, including some of the most vulnerable children in the world. Is there one story that stands out to you? Is there one story that really gets you fired up and motivates you to advocate for children's education?
There's
Mm.
Sorry, Nancy. Can you say that again? I can't hear you.
I've lost connection. I think I lost connection there briefly.
Okay.
Yeah, there's lots of stories. One in particular that I like to share, and I have a photo to bring up here. That's the one. Great, thank you. We have a project in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now called EGAL, Equality for Girls Access to Learning. It's funded by the Canadian government. And within that project, we are addressing mental health issues for girls who have been traumatized by conflict in Kasai Central Province. So some of these girls have been out of school, some of them may have been married early, they may have had children very early and have dropped out. They don't feel confident about going back to school. And one girl in particular, this isn't her, but it could be, this girl represents that girl. She's 19 years old. When the conflict broke out in 2017 in her village, militia burst into her home. They killed her sister, they killed her grandfather, and her grandfather was the one who was paying her school fees. They raped her, and she became pregnant. She had the child, but she didn't want the child. She hated the child. The child was a reminder to her of everything that she had gone through. She felt ashamed, and she didn't want to go back to school because she couldn't be facing her peers at that point. We have put her into this program called Healing in Harmony, which is being implemented by a partner called Make Music Matter. It's a Canadian NGO. And what they do is they do therapeutic music programming. So the children who have had trauma are working with a psychologist and a music producer. The psychologist takes them through a curriculum of understanding what they've experienced, helping them to articulate that in one-on-one and group therapy. And then they write music. They are trained to write music, lyrics and music about their experience. And then they record their songs. So you see here, this young lady is actually recording her music. It's a very empowering experience for them. And this young lady said that after going through the Healing and Harmony program, she understood that what happened to her was not her fault, that she didn't need to be ashamed, that she felt confident about going back to school, and she also could feel love for the child that she had born. So now she's making plans to go back to school as a result of having her mental health and her trauma addressed.
That's a really beautiful story. I've heard of the music. I heard about the program like in another context, but I don't hearing it from you just like, man. Like
and they also perform. They perform publicly, so they'll have a public concert of their music afterwards. Everyone in the community comes out. Hundreds of people attend, and it's just such an empowering situation for them. They're changed. They're changed forever, and they feel hope as well.
And I love that it's like an artsy kind of education that provides that. I don't know. It's an aside.
Oh, it's the healing power of music, right? It's the healing power of music.
Yeah.
And for some of these young people, it's very hard to articulate abuse. Very hard for them to find the words. In music, they can talk about it. It's much easier for them to share it. So the music actually liberates them and gives them a chance to articulate what they've gone through.
It definitely gives a lot of depth to that, the old saying, when words fail, music speaks.
Exactly. That's a great saying.
Yeah. So you shared like a really amazing story. I'd like to pivot to your own story, actually. We mentioned earlier that you used to be a school teacher in the classroom. What made you decide to pivot your career to focus on education programming in a humanitarian context?
Well, there was one aha moment that made me change my mind about where to go with my career. And it was when I went to Kenya. I had an opportunity to go to Kenya with a small organization based in Ontario. And I did some teacher training in Kenya. And it opened my eyes to what international education looked like. I came back from that experience thinking, I need to leave the classroom. I need to get out of the walls of the classroom and explore the world of education a little bit more. So as a result of that, I went back to school. I studied international project management at Humber College in Toronto. And while I was in that I took a leave from teaching. So I was still employed as a teacher, but I took a leave to go to that course. It was a one-year course. While it had an internship component, and I worked for the Ontario Hospital Association supporting an HIV/AIDS clinic in Lesotho in Southern Africa as part of my internship. And I also went back to Kenya and did more teacher training. So I was resolved at that point that this is what I wanted to do. Our former president, Dave Toyson, came to visit our class and spoke to us. And I was so moved by his demeanor, the work that he was doing, the purpose. I was sponsoring a child in Rwanda at that time, but I remember going up to him and lining up to shake his hand. And I said to him, I'm going to work for you one day. And within a few months, I got a posting for the job that I've started with, Global Education Coordinator. Applied for it, got it, had to decide whether to go back to teaching, decided, no, this is what I want to do. And I've been at World Vision ever since. Moved from that coordinator's position to where I am now as a technical specialist. That's the short version of the story. There were a lot of other pieces in between, but yeah.
I love how you just said, I'm going to work for World Vision one day, and then you made it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to World Vision, and you spoke a little bit about this earlier, but what are some of the other interventions or solutions that, based on World Vision's programmatic experience, is the most effective in emergency situations? For example, when you spoke about the music and healing programs earlier, it dawned on me that making sure children are in school isn't just about making sure that there are classrooms and books and teachers, and that there's a peaceful enough situation for children to actually be able to concentrate and learn, but you also have to heal the mental and emotional psychological wounds so that they would actually succeed in school. So what are some of these other interventions and solutions that what is World Vision doing in order to address these needs?
I want to talk about two projects specifically, and one is both of them are funded by the Canadian government. The first one is called Imagine. It's taking place in Mali, and Mali is a very conflicted country if you've been following the news at all. This is a consortium project with World Vision, Plan International Canada, and Save the Children Canada. And we are responding in two regions. You can see them on the map there, called Mopti and Segu. They're dark in color because the security risks in those areas are at the highest. And the schools are under attack. Education is under attack, literally under attack in these areas. Back in June of this year, there were terrorists who came into one of the villages where World Vision is implementing education programming. They burned schools. They killed 130 people. They killed teachers. They killed the headmaster at a school. And some of our volunteers went missing as well from our reading clubs. So these are highly insecure areas, and we have to be very careful how we respond. We work very closely with the government and the Ministry of Education in Mali to implement different kinds of interventions. But in a lot of cases, in these areas, the schools are closed. They're closed because of conflict. It's not safe for parents don't feel safe sending their children to school. COVID closed schools as well, and there's also been teacher strikes which have closed the schools. So we're doing a fair bit of at-home learning instruction. If you go to the next photo, this is an at-home radio instruction class in one of the villages, where the Ministry of Mali has developed a radio curriculum for exactly this situation, for schools that can't be open. And there are facilitators that World Vision and the other organizations have trained. They go into the villages, they work with households, and they work with the children through the radio programming. So all the learning is done using this remote approach. And the next photo as well will show you something else that we deal with, and that is climate issues. So flooding is a problem in some of the areas where we're working. And in this case, we've got a flooded area, a river where there was no river, and the children have been separated from their school because of the river. So the villagers are helping them get to school by putting them in canoes and taking them to a neighboring village. So there's many barriers to access and different kinds of crises that we have to respond to in these different situations. The next project is the one I was talking about earlier, EGAL in the DRC, Equality for Girls Learning. And we are operating in Kasai Central Province, which you can see on the right side there. And in the next photo, these are reading clubs. So these are informal reading clubs that we run with the youngest children. And they're done outside of school, and they're designed to build a culture of reading in the communities, to get people like parents involved in helping their children to read. And we provide reading materials for them, like the ones they have in their laps that are in their mother tongue language as well. And the next photo. We also distribute school kits. So in this case, the children are getting school bags with the necessary resources that they need for attending school. And the next photo. And these are some of the Healing and Harmony girls that are celebrating the end of their cohort. I just wanted to show this picture because it's so full of hope and joy and empowerment. So you know about that program, I talked about it earlier. But there's many other kinds of interventions that we can do. It depends on the context. For instance, in Ukraine, our response is more focused on mental health and trauma response, but also providing alternative learning spaces for children who are on the move. We have another response in northern Ethiopia where there's a fair bit of conflict, but we're doing alternative learning spaces. We are doing life skills training for youth. We are doing training for teachers. A lot of the response is things that we would do in a stable development context, but we adapt it for the crisis. Some of the more emergency responses could be cash distribution, where we actually help pay for school fees for families that can't send their children to school. And we do security planning with the schools as well. We help them to come up with a safety and security plan if they ever need to evacuate.
I really love how like all the programs that you showed us were really collaborative with communities. Like that image of the children with the backpacks, like waiting for their canoe trip across the river. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole new kind of school bus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it definitely takes a global effort beyond just a local context. That's why World Vision exists. According to the UN, there's a funding gap that since 2010, only about 2% of humanitarian funding has been spent on education. So, how much is needed to support these programs, the education needs of children who face these crises?
I'm glad you asked that because there's currently a campaign that Education Cannot Wait at the UN is running. It's called 222 Million Dreams, and it's for those 222 million crisis affected children. So the Education Cannot Wait fund has usually been around $1 billion, and they're funded by governments, basically. Canadian government has given money to them as well. But this year they're asking for more. They're going for replenishment, and they're asking for 1.5 billion. And that's because of the Ukraine crisis. That's because of COVID, increased attacks on schools and infrastructure around the world, and because of the larger number of children who are being crisis affected. So it's actually going to be costing more. We need more money, and that campaign is ongoing right now to see if we can fill that funding gap.
Now, you told us, not during this call, but in a separate call, that you're going to be traveling soon to Honduras.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, can you tell us what you'll be doing there? What do you expect to see and do on your trip?
This is a very different kind of education project. It's a research project, and we are actually researching how our literacy program model, which is called Unlock Literacy, can be scaled up. How can we get to more children in a cost-effective way? So that's what the research is doing, and it's a chance for us to actually see it being implemented on the ground. We're going with the researchers. We're going to be doing some data consolidation, and that project is ending in December of this year. And we'll be producing a paper that will be talking about how we scale up literacy programming. Honduras has fragile pockets. You know, there's a lot of criminal activity, gang activity that threatens children's livelihoods. But it also was one of the countries where schools were closed for the longest time after COVID and just recently reopened. So there's been a lot of children out of school, a lot of learning loss, and that's why these programs like Unlock Literacy are so critical to get them caught up again.
Thanks for sharing what the context is like in Honduras in particular. I know there's a lot of countries where crises aren't often brought up in the news. So knowing like the ongoing context of different countries like really helps expand our perspectives. So just to end off like our formal Q&A, what can ordinary Canadians do to help support children's education during emergencies?
Well, number one, come to webinars like this, right? Get informed. And there's lots of great information on the web. I think I gave you a few links rather. We only have 5 minutes. That's what I'm reading over here. A few links that people can explore. You can go to the Education Cannot Wait page. You can go to the Interagency Network for Education and Emergencies. They have an excellent report called Mind the Gap, which looks at gaps in education programming around emergencies in particular. And even look up that paper that I mentioned earlier, the Aftershocks paper, Access Denied, about the 1 million girls in sub-Saharan Africa who will probably not be returning to school. So get informed. And then support organizations like World Vision that are really prioritizing education in emergencies. Our new strategic approach in education is going to focus on education in emergencies and the most vulnerable, marginalized children who are affected by emergencies. So if you can support us in any way, we can prioritize our programming and improve on it.
Thanks for letting our audiences know how we can help out. I really appreciate this conversation, especially when you talked about how education provides a sense of stability and structure. As like I'm not like quite a new graduate, but I've been navigating postgraduate life. I definitely understand the value of having the structure of school to help stabilize your life. But like I can only imagine how much more vital it is for children. who are still growing and developing. So thank you for shining a light on all of these issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, KL, we don't have time to answer questions that are submitted through the comments or the chat. So let's wrap this up.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy, and for sharing your insight and perspective and your years of experience. It's been really cool to even just hear like a little bit of your story. It definitely gives hope for like people who might be navigating their own career paths, and the story of hope that you shared when it comes to Make Music Matters was really compelling too.
Well, my pleasure, and I welcome anyone who's listening in to reach out. If they have further questions, I can be contacted directly.
Awesome. And as Nancy said, the first thing that you and I can do to help with education and emergencies and other social issues is to stay informed. So please, if you found this video of value, like, subscribe, comment, and share. You know the drill. And follow us, because we will have another Changemakers Live episode next month. So watch out for it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.